Hello, and welcome to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world. I'm Paul Carr from True Media. This is episode 74 of this show, so it's either the Bruce Matthews episode or the Merlin Olsen episode, depending on which side of the ball you want your Pro Football Hall of Fame lineman. Both those guys played in the NFL's pre-analytics age, if you will, and our guest for this episode is at the forefront of analytics now in the league. His name is Tom Bliss, and he works for the NFL as a senior manager, data scientist within the league's football operations department. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have at least a general sense that teams are using data, and you can figure out some of the ways they do that, whether it's team tendencies or fourth down probabilities, two-point conversion decisions, a whole lot of things like that. It's not as obvious how the league office would use data, and that's what we're talking about today. So in our conversation, Tom Bliss will cover what the NFL's data science group does on the whole and his specific role in the group, the life cycle of a project they might be given, how he and the team work on things from the NFL schedule to new kickoff rules. We'll talk about the NFL's Big Data Bowl, tips for anyone looking to succeed in that or something similar, and advantages of participating in contests like that. General advice on looking to break into sports analytics, and how a physics and astronomy major finds his way into the football world. Then producer Brian Duffley will join me to react and wrap things up. Without further ado, here's the expected value conversation with NFL data scientist Tom Bliss. We're joined now on Expected Value by Tom Bliss, who is a senior manager, football operations data science for the NFL. Tom, welcome to the show. Let me start very high level. What does the NFL's football operations and data science group do on the whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're here to support the game, and we support the game through statistics. Like we want football to be the most competitive, most exciting sport in the world, and we do research that supports it, whether it be for officiating, the NFL schedule, rule changes, any sort of place in which we can be involved and give a data or statistical perspective that could potentially help the game improve or whatever. We're there for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we have a general sense of what, say, a team data scientist does. Ultimately trying to win games, make the team better. But you guys aren't obviously not trying to win games in the same sense. What do you call your group's goal in that sense? It's not winning
Yeah,
games.
no.
It's
Yeah, honestly, I think it's less about winning games, but it's more about having creating a set of rules that maybe make the game better and more competitive and more safe. I mean, a great example is the overtime rule, which we got to see in the most recent
mm-hmm.
Super Bowl. It was somewhat, it came immediately after the season in which there's a Bills Chiefs playoff game, and
Right.
the Chiefs went down the field, scored a touchdown. The Bills didn't have an opportunity to touch the ball. I think there was a feeling that potentially you could argue, oh, this was an inequity to the team that got the ball second. And a lot of fans probably wanted to see both teams get the ball. So this was an opportunity in which we got involved. We simulated what this overtime would look like. We simulated whether or not it would actually be more fair, because we don't want to change the rule if it's not
Right.
actually solving the issue. And we found that it was definitely better in the sense that I think a lot of models and a lot of people out there who have tried to look into it, it's about as close to 50-50 as an overtime rule we had seen. And obviously it doesn't quite work the same in the regular season if we were to apply it, just because there'll be a time limit to regular season games, and playoff games,
Sure.
time is much less of a factor. But that's an example of a win for us, because in our feeling, like that Super Bowl was super exciting, and I think that new playoff overtime format maybe had a part of it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your role specifically within the group. What kind of things are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Not necessarily the specific things, because you can't give everything away, but just what tools are you using and things like that on a daily basis?
That's a good question. I would say probably 80% of what I do is in R.
Mm-hmm.
Within R, I'm typically using SQL to pull in data. I definitely do some analysis in Python. It kind of depends on what I'm working on. If I'm doing more visualization or data cleanup, I'll do that in R. If I'm doing something more modeling or optimization, I might do that in Python. Sometimes I'll do a project where I'll do some of the data cleaning in R and then the modeling in Python. It kind of depends on what I'm working on. But yeah, most of my day I'm just coding, and again, like solving problems related to officiating, health and safety, rule changes, the schedule, and typically we'll get I'll be working through maybe like two or three projects at a time. Sometimes there's some quick ad hoc requests that are something you're supposed to do that day, but mostly just doing some long-term, interesting projects.
So you sort of touched on this with the overtime example, but what's a typical kind of life cycle of a project look like? Meaning, how does it come to your attention? What do you do? Where does it go? Things like that.
Yeah, well, I think yeah, some of our primary projects like that might come to a rule change. So obviously with that one, um, uh, there's a process in which rules are proposed by the clubs, and then after the rule is proposed, we have to go through the process of looking at it from a data perspective and assisting in whatever could help. And I mean, this one was a really good use case where the big question was, is this like what's the win probability for each team? What's the game theory here? And I think that's something that our group is very strong at. So that was a really good example. But essentially, the rules proposed. This it goes to football operations. Football operations passes along to us, and then our findings are presented to the owners when the vote is being cast. Another life cycle of a project, maybe if it's not necessarily tied to a rule change, it literally might just come from someone in the general football operations group or somebody in the NFL. There are data groups that do things more related to like fan data or ticketing data that
Right.
isn't necessarily what we would answer. So if there's a question that might involve data that touches the game, we're kind of all ears, and typically they'll like a group will come to us, and sometimes it's a group we haven't really worked with, sometimes it's someone we work with all the time, and say, hey, is it possible to do X, Y, and Z? And if it is, we'll definitely be willing to help. So that's kind of where it gets started, and depending on what outcome they're looking for, we'll kind of work to that.
You have a favorite thing that you've done? You've been at the NFL about 4 years. Any favorite
Yeah,
project that you can tell us about that's been a fun one to work on?
yeah. I mean, the rule changes are one, but maybe to get into another, the schedule equity stuff has been really
Hmm.
interesting to me. And we might get into this more later, but like one
Yeah.
one of my favorite things that we've done is we've looked at. So it's a difficult question. So obviously the NFL schedule comes out every year, and then we have teams that play on buys, like a week off, teams that play on Monday, facing a team that plays on Sunday, teams that play on Thursday, playing a team that plays on Sunday the previous week. So there are a lot of games in which the number of days off in between are unequal. There's also travel considerations. Like, Seattle and Miami are very far from each other. And that's a lot different than Seattle going to San Francisco or Miami going to Jacksonville or something like that. So there are travel considerations. We essentially built out a modeling framework that, while accounting for team strength, we tried to measure the value of rest, which is pretty interesting. Like the issue is, um, team like you like we could like a simple way to do it is just say, oh, what's the win loss record after a
Sure.
Monday night or after a bye. But I mean, specifically with Monday night and Thursday night, I think we all know that the better teams are more likely to play Monday night than the less good teams. That's just a
Right.
fact. I mean, if you look at the number of primetime games each team has, Kansas City has five, and some of the other teams that were picking at the top of the draft have a lot less. So there
Right.
definitely is a relationship there. So we have to take into account team strength, or else we're totally missing part of the story. So building out a model that, while taking into account team strength, while taking into account home advantage, which obviously also is a factor, trying to measure and estimate the value of rest in terms of points, in terms of spread, as just a way to say, okay, if you know you have to play on Monday night, you have to play after a bye. how much does that actually affect the outcome of the game? And
Hmm.
teams can complain about it,
And they will.
and so you'll see articles sometimes about
Yeah.
um, rest, but we really want to actually see what it does, as opposed to just looking at the net rest days and assuming that there's something important
And
there.
as you do these things, is this in advance of the schedule, meaning the computer spits out some options and you get feedback on it before it's finalized, or is it more an after the fact analysis type of story? Where does it fit into kind of the holistic NFL schedule release thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The we work with the scheduling team and we provide them information. So part of it is us just sort of presenting our research
Mm,
prior to the schedule release, and part of it is like just like before it, and helping them out as they go through.
I gotcha. So when you get your hands on the NFL schedule, whenever it is the rest equity type of thing? Is that the first thing that you personally are looking at, whether it's as a fan or from a this is my job sort of thing, or what does your mind kind of jump to initially as soon as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Well, one thing that's significant about the NFL schedule is, I mean, and not everybody knows, is that the matchups are decided in January.
Right.
So all that is sort of determined by the NFL schedule is the order of games and who's playing in what prime time. So for me, I mean, obviously from a work perspective, yeah, we're looking at some of the maybe potential inequities, and that's something that we've done, just like using our model and whatnot. But uh, honestly, I think from my personal perspective, I'm always interested in just the primetime games and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff.
Yeah. What you know you're going to sit down and watch one way or the
Yeah,
other,
what I
right?
know I'm going to sit down and watch exactly.
Yeah. All right. Moving on from the schedule release, we've got some new kickoff rules coming this year. From the research that you guys have done that you can share, how do you anticipate these new kickoff rules changing the game and or what people see on the field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, one, the big thing is if you look at the XFL field position, which is maybe a way to approximate what we might see. The rules are a little bit different. The field position will typically, and based on conversations we've had, the field position is typically a little bit better
Hmm.
than what we saw in the NFL last year, especially because 80% of plays were just going straight to the 25. So with improved field position, we expect somewhat of a like improved scoring position, potentially higher scoring. With that being, I mean, if you're going to start at the 26 or the 27, that's better. And also, I mean, it's also going to be a lot more variable. Like 80% of plays literally were touchbacks last year. I think now when you see a kickoff, you could imagine a team starting anywhere between the 20 and the 30, and it not being totally crazy. Where obviously last year it was bad. And with better field position, we're going to see fewer punts, and that's just because from the like 50-yard line, 40 to 50-yard line, you as
Right.
fans we kind of know teams aren't punting as much from that position, and if you're going to start a little bit higher up, um, you only have to gain 20 yards to sort of be in that position where you might be a lot more likely to go for it. And finally, I think teams are the strategy is going to be pretty interesting. I think teams are going to try to aim near the end zone, but not directly in the end zone. If they go directly in the end zone, the rule is the ball goes to the 30. If they land outside the end zone and then bounce into the end zone, it goes to the 20. So I think teams are really going to try to hit it right near the end zone to
Yeah.
sort of limit field position.
Yeah. It's gonna be wild. Just from a we've grown up watching football one way, the kickoffs one way, and now not so much. So
Yeah.
that'll be uh that'll be fun to see. I want to ask just kind of about some general data usage accessibility. Like what data are you working with? I mean, a lot of this is public, some of it is proprietary to leagues and the team, but just generally, what do you have to work with if it's something like this, especially from an on the field standpoint?
A lot of what I work with directly is, obviously it's like the game feed, the play-by-play data. That's public, but we collect it. Like I pull from our database, not from necessarily from the public source. So
Right,
the information will be exactly the same,
right. You're just getting it a different way.
getting a different way. I pull a decent amount from NGS, the Next Gen Stats, the tracking data. I work with that a bit. We also use PFF a little bit as well for some of our use cases too. So probably a mix of those three. I would say mostly NGS and sort of our play-by-play data.
I know you're not working for a team, obviously, but you're familiar with the state of data, I'll call it, in the league. You've been there
Sure.
4 years. What have you seen change in those 4 years from the way that teams are using data?
That's a good question. I really think that the tracking data is sort of being used more and more and probably in smarter ways. I mean, I'll just speak for us, for example. I think
Hmm.
when we started, a lot of like what people want to do with that tracking data is just look at the max speed or just something like the distance traveled.
Yeah,
But as you sort of get more and more used to it, you can do a lot more cool things. You can build models using it. You can try to have sort of better takeaways than just, oh, this is the fastest speed
right.
to end on the play. So
Yeah,
I think just doing cooler things with it, and not to toot our group's horn here, but I do think the Big Data Bowl, a lot of the great projects that came out of that, sort of inspired more work and also gave a great foundation to build off of
for sure.
for many people.
Yeah, I want to get to that, and sort of as part of that, you've had different metrics that have been spawned by Big Data Bowl, whether it's things like rush yards above expected, things like that. Anything you can tease or want to tease that might be coming down the pike for out of your group this year? We might see on TV or wherever it might be.
I don't know what I'm allowed to tease, but I definitely think we're going to have some metrics. If anything, probably related to tackling, considering that
Okay,
was the most
that was
recent
the
Big
Big
Data
Data
Bowl.
Bowl. Yeah.
I don't know what specific. I can't guarantee anything specifically, but
All
I
right.
definitely would expect something tying to
All right.
tackling.
All right, cool. And I'll do a self plug here. We talked to Matt Chang, one of the Big Data Bowl winners, on this pod earlier in the year, so you can go find that in the
Yeah,
archives if you
yeah,
want.
definitely check that out.
So let's talk Big Data Bowl. What's your involvement or your group's involvement? I mean, we know Mike Lopez, the head of your group, is kind of his baby. He
Yes.
started it when he came to the league. What's your involvement specifically in the Big Data Bowl?
Yeah, I think so. It's a group effort, and I'd like to shout out kind of everybody on my team: Ali, Blake, Andrew Patton, Maya Penn, Subia, Shani Desai, and Mike Lopez. All of us do a lot for it, so I'd like to shout them all out. But I think my role mostly is one, I typically pull the data at the beginning of the
Mm.
time.
The subset
Two,
that you give
yeah,
the
yeah,
applicants
yeah,
or
yeah,
competitors.
get it organized, and get it ready to upload so people can look at it. Then I am involved in the forums and sort of answering questions to at the BDB help email address during the competition. And three, just trying to be helpful wherever we can. I mean, the at the end, there's like a big event, and I think Ali Blake on my team deserves the most credit for organizing the event, but I try to help out where I can there, and also help out a little bit with one, like just organizing the grading, organizing the feedback. It doing that is a long process, so that's probably where I'm most involved.
Yeah. From your perspective, what are a couple of keys to a successful Big Data Bowl entry? What separates the winner of the top few from some of the others on the whole?
Yeah, I would say one, probably the easiest thing. I mean, I don't know if this is easy, but readability, making like having something that like makes sense immediately to the person. I think sometimes like there are some submissions in which they do something really clever and
Yeah.
smart, but it's just maybe it doesn't do super, like maybe it doesn't do as well as the submitter thinks, just because it's hard to read and no one quite knows what's going on. I think the the submissions are like read by club staffers and a busy time for the club staffers, and making it just easy for them to read makes it a lot easier. And I think that's one big thing, and also just not trying to answer. I mean, this ties to the first thing to a certain extent, but not trying to answer too many questions all at
Right.
once. I think sometimes you'll see a submission that has like five different parts to it and tries to. No one can solve football in 2000 or 2000 word limit. No one can solve tackling. No one
Yeah.
can, like, even like the subsection of football. So doing one thing really well is really great. I think an example of this, Joe Andruzzi, who now works for the Arizona Cardinals, I think his submission was just on covering slant routes. I don't even remember what it was. I don't remember what specifically what it is, but he did one small thing, but he did it super well, and I think
Hmm.
that paid off.
Yeah, yeah, I like that on this year's the one from Matt and his group. So basically, are you a good tackler or not? Was
Yeah,
ultimately
yeah,
that's really easy to explain. Obviously, you're putting numbers to it, and there's a complex stuff behind it. But
yeah,
ultimately, it was, are you making more tackles than you should? Which I think is pretty easy to explain. And if you're a defensive guy, like that's what you want. You guys make tackles,
yep,
right?
yep, absolutely.
What from a kind of a student or someone who's looking to get involved in the big data bowl or something similar, what how would you pitch the value of that to them? Like, hey, you should definitely do this.
What I would say is I would highlight. I think we're at like 40 or 50 NFL hires right now. I would highlight like another 10 or so that aren't in the NFL and are doing other sports. I would highlight that, if you get involved, it's a really like good way if you want to work in sports data, if you want to work in football data, it's a really good way to one show what you can do, to highlight your skills, to network, to meet people. I think a lot of opportunities for teams and for vendors and at the league where people are asking, oh, did you submit to the big data bowl? What's your like? What did you do? I think doing that just presents a really it's a good way to show, hey, I have these skills, I can do it, I know football, I know data. So it's a really good way to do your skills, and if you do well enough, obviously you also get an invitation to Indianapolis, in which you can present your work
Yeah.
to the people in person. So it's a cool opportunity for anybody who's interested in working in that space.
We'll get into your path to where you are in a minute, but just in general, any other advice that you have for someone who's looking to get into the sports analytics field one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm touching on a little bit with the big data bowl, but just
Hmm.
generally, I would say having projects on like a website, on a GitHub, just publicly available for people to read and review really helps. And I think it can kind of highlight like if someone says, "Oh, I love football. I'm super passionate. I love data." Like you can say, "Okay," and
Right.
see how much I love it. I put this together, or see like this is a question I answered. And I think really you can just start off by whether it's through the big data bowl or just through like NFL Faster, NFL Reader, whatever data source you want, thinking of a question you genuinely are curious about and saying, "Hey, I wonder if I could do this with data or whatever." Like something as simple as, oh, I wonder, I don't know, I mean, this is very simple, but like, what's the DPI rate on passes that are deep versus short? Something as simple as that. Do that, and maybe ask another question after that, and just build it up. So I would always just suggest thinking of like answering questions you're interested in, and that'll always lead you to something that will be interesting to you, and hopefully you can use in an interview or put it on your resume.
Yeah. Okay. Question I'm interested in. You studied physics and astronomy at
Yeah,
University of Wisconsin. How do you get from that to a job with the NFL?
it's a good question. So yeah, when in undergrad, I loved physics. I loved math. I think that's kind of where I wanted to go. I was studying that. I've always been a math person, but I've always been a really big football fan. And so my senior year at University of Wisconsin, I was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I physics. I mean, you can kind of go in like there isn't necessarily like just a straight like a clear path to what you do with a
Hmm.
physics degree immediately out of undergrad. Some people get a PhD and they try to do research. Some people become a physics teacher. Some people just work in an industry as whatever. I thought I was like I love physics, but I knew a lot of the research related to it. Like a lot of it was quantum mechanics and that sort of stuff. And in all honesty, that was thing I liked the most about physics was like a block on like a inclined plane. I just loved like mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
It's the craziest. Like people hate physics, but I just loved that, and that wasn't quite. I mean, a lot of the research on on that has sort of been figured out. So, I was looking into maybe what I wanted to do next, and I was maybe thinking about doing like a master's in computer science. And then I learned about data science, and I kind of thought, okay, maybe there is a chance that data science could tie to sports because that's statistics, and I
Right.
love football. So I applied for some data science programs, got into Columbia, and I ultimately went there. And I literally saw an NFL internship on its website, on the NFL website, and I applied to it. Didn't know anybody, and I got an interview, and then I got the internship, and then from this internship, I was able to get a full-time opportunity. So yeah, that's kind of how it worked out. It's funny. I don't know if I would recommend just applying online and hoping for the best,
Right.
but it did kind of work out for me.
Yeah. Anything in that physics astronomy major that helps you in different ways with the current job, whether it's the way you
Yeah.
think or a skill or something like that?
Yeah. I would say within data, I mean, one thing that I noticed, at least when I was studying data science, is like a lot of physics is linear algebra, and that's a lot of data science. And so, sort of understanding how matrices work and vectors work, I think that was really helpful in terms of translating my skills
Hmm.
to data science. I think working with the tracking data too. I mean, working with
Yeah.
speed, acceleration, XY positions, that like just sort of points in space. That is something I felt very comfortable with, and I think that tied to my physics degree. I think I remember I think I took an astronomy course in which we studied multiple like I think a like a multiple body problem, and sort of the gravitational pulls against them, and we kind of had like an X and a Y of different points in space. And I think when I was first looking at the tracking data, I was like, oh, that kind of reminds me of
That's right
this,
here.
like thinking about planets in space, the gravity affecting each other, and
Yeah.
how that tied to football players running on a field.
Yeah, you sort of stole my next question, which was going to be, it seems like NGS is physics-ish. Because
Ish,
just for the
yeah,
people who don't know, it's you have chips in the shoulder pads, so you know where every player is all the time.
yeah.
Any other way those two things kind of tie together, at least when you're trying to think about different problems?
Yeah, I mean, another example, like one cool thing. I think there was a big Dateable paper on I think it was called like NFL 3D. This was
Hmm.
pretty cool, but essentially, in physics, there's this thing called projectile motion, and it's essentially a way to think about how an object might move in the air.
Okay.
So, for example, if I were to throw a football in the air, you know that it goes up at a certain angle and it has to land at a certain point. Gravity is the same everywhere, so you can assume that you know like it comes down due to gravity.
Right.
I think NFL 3D did this thing where they, using the projectile motion equation, they were able to be, because basically you knew how long it was in the air. You're able to extract what the z coordinate was of the ball, um, as it was thrown, because you have the x, you have the y, you see how far it went, you know how long it was in the air,
Hmm.
and assuming gravity is gravity, you know that it must have, and it landed at a certain time. You can figure out what z is. So that
Yeah.
I thought was a really cool use case of physics,
Nice. Nice.
because yeah, the current way the ball is being measured, we don't have a z coordinate. We only have the x and the y. So it was pretty cool that somebody was able to extract that.
Nice. I like it. All right. We wrap things up here with our playing favorite segment where we go through a number of your favorites just to get to know you a little bit more. So we'll start with what is your favorite number and why?
My favorite number, I'll go 25.
Okay.
I don't know. I like numbers that are squares.
Hmm.
I think I like the fact that when you multiply 5 times 5, you always have a 5 at the end. When you do 25 times 25, that's 625, so you still have a 5 at the end. So I'll say that. I don't know. I like that number.
All right. Favorite player of yours as a kid, football or otherwise?
So I grew up in Oakland, California.
Okay.
So I was a Raiders fan growing up. Maybe I would say Darren McFadden.
Okay.
Maybe I would say maybe I'll say Sebastian Janikowski. He was consistent. He was great.
It says
Yeah,
something about the Raiders of that era if your favorite
yeah,
player is a kicker, right?
yeah. Yeah. He was probably the one of the better, more consistent players during my childhood.
Yeah. All right. Since you studied astronomy, a question we don't get to ask a lot of people: your favorite planet or star or constellation?
Yeah, I think I'll say Saturn. I
Uh huh.
think the rings of Saturn are absolutely cool. I like that
Yeah.
it has a lot of moons. I like Jupiter too. Yeah, I'd probably say Saturn
All right. Saturn.
or
Done.
Jupiter.
I like it. All right. You went to Wisconsin, as we talked about. If I get to Wisconsin, to Madison, where should I go eat? What's your favorite place there?
So, okay, I'll go with Tornado Steakhouse. That's a
Ooh.
steakhouse that I went to.
Okay.
I remember when I was there. Very good steak. So
All
I'll
right.
say there.
All right. Putting it on the list. And finally, you have a favorite "How did I get here" moment, meaning some cool thing, cool moment that happened to you as part of this NFL job you have.
Yeah, I think probably one of the coolest things was when I first went to the NFL Combine. I think that was 2022 because I started in 2020 and
Whoops.
yeah, the 2020 Combine actually did happen. That
Yeah.
was right before COVID, but
That's right. I was
I
there.
started. Yeah. I started, I think, that week or the week before, so it just didn't make sense for me to travel. And the
Yep.
2021 Combine got canceled. And I think the
Yep.
2022 Combine, they didn't have athletes there. There were not a lot of people there, but I went for some meetings and whatnot. But it was really cool, and I mean, just really like being around like NFL players, NFL coaches, and all of that. I thought that was
Yeah.
really awesome.
It is. I also the most fun thing there is almost just sitting like in that Marriott coffee shop and just watching the NFL world go by, and all these
Yeah,
faces like, wait, who's that? Or I kind of recognize him, and he's not
yeah,
wearing his team gear or whatever it is. It's a fun
yeah,
place to be.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your stories with us, Tom Bliss, NFL senior manager, football operations data scientist. Thank you for joining us on Expected Value.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Back in the True Media studios, I'm Paul Carr. Thanks again to the NFL's Tom Bliss for joining us on the show. You can follow him on Twitter at Data with Bliss and check our show notes for links to work he and his team have done and more information on the league's Big Data Bowl. I'm joined now by producer Brian Duffley. Welcome in, Brian. What did you take away from the conversation with Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It was really good to listen to your conversation with Tom compared to last week where we talked to Curtis Goss of USA Swimming. This is a little bit more in my lane as far as fandom, actually, being a big football fan and knowing a little bit more about some of the things that entails and relating that to more so the analytics world that is
Mhm.
consistently growing in football. It was really cool to talk to Tom and get to hear some of the different insights that he does just with improving the game, not so much like focusing on that team perspective as far as what can individual teams do to improve, but more so like how do you improve the game as a whole, and
Mhm.
just seeing like some of the people behind that is really cool to actually listen to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I knew so Mike Lopez is Tom's boss. I think we referenced him during the show.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of the founder, if you will, of the NFL's analytics group, and knew him from before he was hired there. Just he was known in the sports analytics space. He's just conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So when he started working for the league, you know, I at least kind of you raise an eyebrow just because you're not sure what are you going to do, because again, it's different than a team analyst who is trying to win games or a TV researcher or a writer who's looking at data to support a point, refute a point, or accomplishment or something like that. But
Yeah.
in some ways, it's kind of the same thing because just like those, writer researchers are trying to use data to do certain things, or a team analyst is trying to answer football questions to win games, the league's analytics group, we'll just call them, they're doing it more from a global type of standpoint. They just have a different goal. Instead of winning games or making content, they're just aiming for a good product, a good game. It's entertaining,
Mm-hmm.
it's safer, whatever it's more even if you're talking about the rest stuff. So yeah, it's like to me, it's not the most intuitive type of role or job, but when you hear Tom break it down and what they do, it makes a lot of sense. And I just think there's a lot of those in a lot of different areas, both in sports and not, that people don't see all that much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the US perspective too, as far as like hockey, baseball, basketball. There's all these sports that we focus on as far as like growing popularity, and football is not one of those that most people think of because it's so ridiculously popular
Doing pretty
relative
good
to
at that
every
by
sport.
themselves.
Yeah, but then at the same time, you understand that they are constantly pushing to find ways to grow the game and like
Right.
reach a younger fan base or a wider fan base.
Mhm.
And they're not just settling with being the number one sport in the US. They're like, we need to continue to grow this, find better ways for this game, but also like encouraging, especially the rule changes, ways to have more people play the game as well, since all the
Mhm.
safety concerns, of course. So it makes sense they have such a dedicated team just looking to improve it as
Yep.
far as like growing that future of the NFL.
Yeah, and I kind of said it's a good example of a sports analytics job that is not with a team, because I think I've said this
Mhm.
before. The team jobs are the most visible, sexiest,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. But I mean, you used to work for a team. Like that's kind of, I think, what everyone thinks of first. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah,
didn't really think of a position like this, honestly, until
right,
I worked
exactly.
with a team, was exposed to True Media's platform, and was like, okay, there are other positions within
Hmm.
the sports world that are still just as exciting and cool, but it's not just focused on how do we get this team to win tonight's game.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think that goes in sports, whether it's something, these third party vendors that are developing whatever, better stats, whatever better mousetrap it is. I think Tom also referenced, there's ticketing, ratings, other kind of research with numbers like that,
Yeah.
that sports leagues have, networks have, where it's analytics of a different kind of thing. And there's options beyond sports. I think almost every company now has some sort of analytics people. So the the world in that space keeps growing, which is good for everybody who's interested in working with numbers in whatever field it might be.
I did get the opportunity to meet some people in my quick experience in professional baseball who are
Mm-hmm.
more so in that customer service or data operations as far as like ticketing and things like that. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's almost just as advanced as a lot of the front
Right.
office stuff that is utilized to like look at player performance. And it makes sense. It's like it's a lot of money getting thrown around at these games, and there's a lot of tickets being sold that they got to optimize this best as they can. So
Yeah.
like just every single facet of it feels like every sport, it just goes so in depth, and there's so many layers to these things that I think it's hard to consider all of them until you actually talk to somebody in that field and
Yep.
you're like, oh yeah, your job isn't all that
Right.
different, you're just focused on something else or have different goals.
And like I said, beyond sports, everyone's doing it too. I have a buddy who's a analyst for a mega church. They have information. They're
Yeah.
trying to figure out whether it's, uh, you know, contributions, whether it's attendance, all these things that can be affected by a lot of things. There's just so many more options than there were 2-3 decades ago in the
Mhm.
data and the analytics space. It's great. So, all right,
Yeah,
thanks, Brian. Thanks
of
once again
course.
to Tom Bliss for taking time to talk with us. We have plenty of other NFL related shows in the archives. You mentioned Mike Lopez, Tom's boss. He was the third guest we had on this show. I think that was back in 2019. As mentioned, we've also talked with this year's Big Data Bowl winner, Matt Chang, back in March, and the winners from the previous 4 years. Those are all in the archives as well. While you're there, we appreciate subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show. That helps us to spread the word, as does any social media mention or any other way you have of sharing this episode. On behalf of producer Brian Duffley and all of us here at True Media, I'm Paul Carr. Thank you for listening to Expected Value, the podcast that goes inside the sports analytics world.